Welcome to a special episode of The Vantage Point. You might have noticed that I was away for a few weeks. I came back last week with a video on surnames and early families, but it was shorter than usual. The reason for my absence in last week's short video has to do with health issues. As a number of my friends who regularly join me on The Vantage Point know, I've been a frequent flyer in hospital since mid-November. My current challenges involve recovering from my 10th orthopedic surgery that I underwent 3 weeks ago. I'm an oddball because I no longer have a biological hip or knee. They're all artificials now. I am the $6 million man. I have the bills to prove it. For at least a month now, I've wanted to produce a video to address some comments that I received on the episode titled Myths and Legacy of the Scotch-Irish. The comments were mostly about linguistics and were certainly not personal, but more than a few people commented that Scotch is a whiskey and Scots is a people. In current day usage of the language, and especially in a British context, that's true. Still, you have to appreciate that I am a historical geographer who enjoys tracing aspects of culture from one place to another and over time. I'm especially interested in migration and the interface between the environment and religion and how they affect a plethora of human perceptions. So, today on The Vantage Point, I'm going to present a discussion on a group of people who were the basis of 3 of my books, the Scots Irish, or as I like to call us, the Ulster Scots or Irish Protestants. These are the same people that Patrick Griffin called the people with no name. I hope you'll join me. Well, the label Scotch-Irish is an Americanism and generally refers to families of colonial era Irish Protestants. Some immigrants adopted the label early on. Some may have adopted the name later to distinguish themselves from Irish Catholics that the British society had deemed to be lower on the social totem pole. However, the label Scotch-Irish was used as far back as 1573 when Queen Elizabeth coined it to identify Scottish Islanders and Highlanders who had intermarried with their Celtic and Catholic kin in Ulster. That's the 9 northern counties on the Emerald Isle or Ireland. The first notable person to apply the label of Scotch-Irish to him or herself was an Ulsterman, the Reverend Francis McCamey. He graduated from the University of Glasgow, and instead of returning to Ulster, that's Donegal to be specific, he answered the call to establish the very first Presbyterian church in the New World at Rehoboth, Maryland. In 1683, McCamey built the church on his own land and at his own expense. As I mentioned earlier in a video, I descended from his brother John, and like Francis, I too graduated from the University of Glasgow. You might find this interesting. According to James Leburn, about half of the students who took their degrees at the University of Glasgow in the 1700s enrolled as Scotch-Irish. In a report written by 1695 by Sir Thomas Lawrence, the Secretary of Maryland, he penned these words: "In the 2 counties of Dorchester and Somerset, where the Scotch-Irish are numerous, they clothe themselves by their linen and woolen manufactures or products." You might note that the linen industry was adopted by the Scotch-Irish through their interactions in Ulster with Huguenot settlers from France. They brought the linen industry with them from France. In 1723, an Anglican minister named George Ross paid a missional visit to Newcastle, Delaware. He wrote back to England to report that they call themselves Scotch-Irish, and he also called them lazy flock, and are the bitterest railers against the church, and he meant the Anglican church, not the Catholic church, but the Anglican church, that ever trod American ground, end of quote. Some of you might still be thinking that Scotch is still a whiskey, Barry, I don't care what you say, and has no place being attached to people. As late as the 16th and 17th centuries, objects, things, and even particular tree species grown in Scotland were called Scotch something or another. Many of those names are still used today, but to more than a few people, Scotch should only apply to whiskey. If you've ever been to a Scottish Highland Games event, you would have been exposed to a savory breakfast item called the Scotch egg. I love Scotch eggs. They're hard-boiled eggs wrapped in pork sausage and topped off by breadcrumbs that are made golden brown by deep frying. It's too bad that this savory dish has not been put on the menus of American restaurants. I'm thinking McDonald's would be a perfect place for it with their name, McDonald's. In addition to whiskey and boiled eggs, many of us grew up using Scotch tape to wrap Christmas presents that were lovingly placed under a Scotch pine tree that was adorned with lights and bright decorations. Without taking a particular stand, I have to point out that perhaps the best book on the social history of the Scotch-Irish was written by James G. Liebern and published by the University of North Carolina Press in 1962. I think his argument for a hyphenated identity is solid, but the question remains, and one he did not answer or even address: what name should they bear? That's why Patrick Griffin called them the people with no name. Nevertheless, Liebern points out that the Scots who settled in Ulster during the plantation era of the 17th century were ethnically and culturally distinct from the Highlanders and Islanders who had settled there in the preceding centuries. Plantation-era settlers from Scotland were not Gaelic speakers, and they weren't Roman Catholics. They spoke either standard Scots English or a Northumbrian dialect called Scots. It evolved from a Northumbrian dialect, of course, that was spoken by the Angles who had settled there in the 5th century. Perhaps more importantly, though, they were Protestants who embraced a Calvinistic worldview. If their religious culture is a topic that you'd like to explore further, check out one or all of my books, In Search of Ulster Scotsland, Space of Time or Distance of Place, or for newcomers, Rediscovering the South's Celtic Heritage. In Ulster, they formed a distinct new ethnicity that was not really Irish, nor was it still Scottish. Protestants living in Ulster during the 16th and 17th centuries understood that and helped us understand why they enrolled as Scotch-Irish students at the University of Glasgow, the closest university to them. As we saw earlier, that was an identity that many settlers carried with them to colonial America. It's also an ethnic classification that the U.S. Census Bureau recognizes. Because of the lack of formal education and ability to maintain social contacts with relatives left behind as settlers moved west and into the interior of the country, many of their descendants lost contact with their ethnic ancestry. There are also others who call themselves Protestant Irish. One of the largest ethnic identities found among the residents in the southern United States, especially Appalachia and the Ozarks, is American only. More than 10% of the populations of West Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, Arkansas, Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, Indiana, and Missouri, they're kind of quasi-south or border areas. At least the southern part of Indiana is. It's typically considered a Midwestern state, but it's got a lot of southern influences. Like Larry Bird, for example, down in French Lick, Indiana. He sounds more like he's from Kentucky than, let's say, northern Illinois. Anyway, some 20% of Kentucky's population calls itself American. No wonder populism and patriotism are strongly felt in those states. At the end of the day, folks, does it matter what you call yourself? That's a real question. I'd love to know your thoughts on the topic and the ethnicity that you embrace. Jot it down in the comments section so we can stimulate a good conversation. Thanks for joining me today. Until I see you again, God bless you and yours. Bye-bye.